"End this madness," the woman said, her voice sharp enough to cut through gold and stone. "I oppose this marriage." The grand hall fell into a stunned silence, and the banners hanging from the ceiling stopped moving as if the air itself had frozen. At the center of the hall, the alien princess stood in full golden armor, her crown catching the sunlight pouring through the massive windows. Princess Aurelia of Lyris had faced wars, assassinations, and the cold eyes of rival empires, yet this single sentence struck her harder than any blade. She turned slowly toward the voice, ready to answer with fire, but her breath stopped when she saw who stood beside the human. The human did not bow. He stood straight in his dark blue military uniform, gold trim shining softly, his black hat tucked under one arm. His name was Ethan Hale, Earth's envoy, and the man she was meant to marry to seal peace between worlds. Aurelia froze. Not because of fear, but because something deep inside her chest cracked open without warning. She had seen images of humans before, studied their biology, their wars, their politics, yet nothing prepared her for the quiet weight of his presence. His eyes were calm, not arrogant, not pleading, just steady, as if he had already accepted whatever fate this hall would decide. The woman who opposed the marriage stepped forward, her silver robes whispering against the marble floor. Lady Seraphine, High Regent of Lyris, raised her staff and pointed it toward Ethan like a verdict. "This creature is a risk," Seraphine said. "A symbol of weakness dressed in ceremony. We do not bind our crown to an unknown species." A murmur spread through the nobles, fear mixing with pride and old hatred. Aurelia felt their doubt like a tightening chain around her spine, yet she could not move, could not look away from the human. "Why does he look like he already knows me?" Ethan felt the eyes of an entire world on his back, but his gaze remained fixed on the princess. He had crossed light years, signed treaties written in bloodless words, and left Earth knowing he might never return. Still, this was the moment his heart began to race. She looks like someone who has never been allowed to choose. Aurelia finally found her voice, though it trembled in ways she did not expect. "You speak out of fear, Regent, not wisdom. This union ends a war that has burned 3 systems." Seraphine's eyes flashed. "Peace built on sacrifice is still sacrifice. You will lose yourself to this alliance, Your Highness." Aurelia's fingers tightened around the edge of her armor. She had heard this all her life, spoken in softer tones and hidden warnings. Duty before desire, crown before heart. "Then why does my heart feel louder than the hall?" Ethan took a single step forward, and guards moved instantly, weapons rising, tension snapping tight. He raised his empty hands, calm but firm, and the motion alone demanded attention. "I did not come to steal your princess," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I came because your people and mine are tired of burying the young." The words landed heavier than any threat. Silence followed, thick and aching. Aurelia felt something shift inside her, a quiet recognition she could not name. No rehearsed speech, no promise of power, just truth spoken without armor. Seraphine's jaw tightened. "You speak well for a stranger," she replied, "but words do not erase blood." "No," Ethan said softly, "but they can stop it from spilling again." Aurelia turned fully toward him then, her blue eyes locking with his, and in that instant the world narrowed to the space between them. She saw exhaustion there and resolve, and something painfully human. Why does his courage feel familiar? The hall waited for her decision, unaware that something far more dangerous than war had just begun to form. Not an alliance of worlds, but a question neither of them had prepared for. What if this marriage was not a prison, but a choice neither of them was allowed to make? As the sunlight shifted across the floor, Aurelia realized that opposing the marriage had been easy. Understanding why her heart had frozen was not. And somewhere between gold and shadow, the future of 2 worlds quietly held its breath. The silence did not break gently. It shattered when the council bells rang, sharp and unforgiving, signaling the pause of judgment. Guards lowered their weapons, nobles began whispering again, and the hall slowly returned to motion, but something fragile had already been disturbed. Princess Aurelia turned away first. She hated herself for that small retreat, yet the pressure in her chest demanded air, distance, control. Her boots echoed against the marble as she walked toward the elevated dais, every step reminding her that she was not just a woman standing in armor, but a crown bound to history. Behind her, Ethan remained where he was. He felt the shift instantly, the moment when curiosity replaced hostility in the room. That frightened him more than open anger ever could. Anger was honest. Curiosity meant judgment was still forming. Seraphine followed Aurelia, her voice lowered but urgent. "You cannot let this continue. The people will see weakness if you hesitate." Aurelia stopped, gripping the edge of the stone railing until the gold of her gauntlets creaked. "They already see hesitation," she said quietly. "They always have." Seraphine frowned. "This is not about your feelings." "When has it ever been?" Aurelia asked, turning at last. Her blue eyes were sharp now, armored in something deeper than steel. "You trained me to rule, you trained me to fight, you never trained me to live." Seraphine flinched just barely. Below them, Ethan was escorted toward a side chamber reserved for honored guests who were also potential enemies. He noticed it immediately. The way doors were designed to close fast from the outside. So this is what trust looks like here. As he walked, his mind replayed Aurelia's expression, the way her breath had caught when she saw him. It was not disgust. It was not pride. It was recognition, raw and unsettling. Why would an alien princess look at me like that? Inside the council chamber, Aurelia faced the elders alone. Their robes shimmered with symbols of ancient victories, wars she had studied as a child and survived as a soldier. They spoke in measured tones, yet their words pressed like hands around her throat. Humans are unpredictable. Earth's loyalty is untested. A marriage cannot be undone without consequence. Aurelia listened, as she always did, but her thoughts drifted to the human standing alone behind guarded walls. He had not begged. He had not flattered. He had not tried to win them. Why does that bother me more than it should? On Earth, Ethan sat in the quiet of the chamber, hands resting on his knees, uniform still pristine despite the long journey. The room smelled faintly of metal and ozone, alien and cold. He thought of home, of the ocean near his childhood city, of his mother's voice when she learned he had volunteered for the envoy mission, knowing what it truly meant, of the unspoken understanding that he might never come back. He had accepted all of that. What he had not accepted was the way his chest tightened when Aurelia turned away. "I didn't come here for her," he told himself. But the lie tasted bitter. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time blurred under the weight of waiting. Then the doors opened without warning. Aurelia stepped inside. She was no longer wearing her crown. The sight struck Ethan harder than any threat. Without the crown, she looked younger, more human in her stillness, though the armor remained. Her gaze swept the room before settling on him, cautious but searching. The guards withdrew, leaving them alone. "You should not be here," Ethan said quietly. "Not without witnesses." Aurelia closed the door behind her. Witnesses only see what they expect. She took a slow breath. "When you looked at me in the hall, you did not see a symbol." Ethan met her eyes. "Neither did you." The admission hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Aurelia's voice softened. "They think this marriage will chain me. They think opposing it will free me." "And what do you think?" Ethan asked. She hesitated, and in that hesitation he saw the truth she had never spoken aloud. "I think I am already bound," she said. "I just don't know to what." Outside the chamber, unseen and unheard, Seraphine watched the sealed doors with growing unease. Because something far more threatening than rebellion was beginning to take shape. What happens when duty and choice stop being enemies and become the same path? The chamber felt smaller now. The air between Aurelia and Ethan had weight, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She studied him, noticing details she hadn't seen before, the way his hands rested calmly, the faint scar on his jaw, the quiet confidence in his stance. Every detail was human, utterly ordinary, yet it pulled at something inside her she couldn't name. "I should leave," she whispered finally, breaking the silence. "They will notice I'm missing." Ethan shook his head. "You came here because you wanted to see me? Admit it." His voice was calm, but not teasing. There was no mask, no diplomacy, just truth. Aurelia blinked. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him this was not a game, this was her crown, her people, her duty. But each time she opened her mouth, her words faltered. She had always commanded armies, led with authority, and yet here she was, frozen by a single human who had not even touched her. "You don't understand," she said finally, voice trembling. "This marriage, it isn't about me, it's about survival, peace, the future of our worlds. I cannot." "Then don't," Ethan interrupted gently. "Don't think about it, not yet, just be here now." Aurelia wanted to leave. She wanted to maintain control, to return to the persona that had never shown weakness. But the truth was raw, unrelenting. For the first time, she felt the urge to choose something for herself. Something beyond duty, beyond crowns. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had no shape here. They spoke in quiet tones, careful not to raise suspicion, yet every word dug deeper into her heart. Ethan told her about Earth, about oceans that stretched beyond the eye, about cities of glass and steel, about people who fought wars they never fully understood. And Aurelia in turn told him about Lyris, its glimmering skis, the weight of golden armor, and the endless pressure of expectations that never allowed her to breathe. "You've been carrying this alone," Ethan said softly. "And yet, you fight as if the whole world depends on you." Aurelia lowered her gaze. "Because it does, or at least it feels that way." Something in Ethan's steady expression made her chest tighten. Not fear, not admiration, just something that stirred an unfamiliar ache. A longing she hadn't given herself permission to feel. Suddenly the doors burst open. Guards rushed in, weapons raised, alarms sounding throughout the palace. "Your Highness, you are needed immediately. The council has decided your presence is required." Aurelia's pulse spiked. She had expected conflict, but not this urgency. She turned to Ethan, heart hammering. "Stay here," she whispered. "If anyone asks, you weren't in this room." He smiled faintly. "Try not to get killed." Aurelia's lips twitched at the corner of a smile, but she didn't have time for more. She pulled herself together, adjusting her golden armor over the flowing layers of her ceremonial robes. Each step toward the dais felt like walking through fire. Her mind raced, thoughts colliding, duty, fear, anger, curiosity, and a strange, dangerous pull toward the human she was supposed to marry. When she reached the council, every eye turned toward her. Seraphine's glare was sharp, accusing, but Aurelia held it with a calm she didn't entirely feel. "You are late," Seraphine said, voice low and trembling with restrained anger. "I was making observations," Aurelia replied, each word deliberate. "And the human, he is not what you think." Whispers spread instantly. Murmurs of disbelief, suspicion, even awe. The council had expected defiance, not this calm confidence tinged with curiosity. "Observations are irrelevant," one elder spat. "We have treaties, laws, and bloodlines to consider. A human cannot." "They can," Aurelia interrupted, voice ringing. "Because humans can choose, and I am beginning to wonder if the crown of Lyris could learn something from that." The chamber froze. Not for the first time, she realized, the smallest human gestures had a power her entire golden army sometimes lacked. Outside, the sunlight spilled across the marble floors, blinding in its intensity. Aurelia's mind drifted, just for a heartbeat, to the human waiting behind guarded doors. To the way he had looked at her, unshaken, unafraid, and entirely real. The question she could not answer pressed against her chest. What happens when duty collides with choice, and the heart dares to step where crowns fear to tread? And in that silence, Aurelia knew the world had already begun to change. The council chamber was still buzzing with murmurs when Aurelia stepped down from the dais. Every movement she made was measured, deliberate, yet inside her chest a storm raged, fueled by thoughts she could not name. Duty told her to ignore the human, to focus on the marriage as a political necessity. But her mind and heart rebelled quietly, insisting she remember the calm, unwavering gaze she had seen earlier. Seraphine followed her closely, voice low and sharp. "You are treading dangerous ground, Aurelia. Do not let curiosity compromise the crown." Aurelia stopped mid-step, turning to face her mentor with a quiet intensity. "Curiosity keeps the crown alive," she said softly, her words surprising even herself. "Blind obedience is what kills empires." Seraphine's hand twitched, but she said nothing. Aurelia left the chamber and made her way to the balcony overlooking the city. The golden sun reflected off the towers, painting them like fire, yet Aurelia barely saw it. Her mind was with Ethan, with the strange calm he carried, and the way it had shattered her certainty in a single glance. Inside the guest quarters, Ethan was packing. The room was simple, starkly different from the opulent halls he had walked through all day, yet it felt heavy with the weight of expectation. He had faced impossible missions before, but none carried the intimate tension of knowing a princess. An entire world was thinking of him at that very moment. He remembered her voice, the tremor she tried to hide, and it made his chest tighten. The irony was bitter. He had crossed galaxies to negotiate peace, yet the true challenge had nothing to do with treaties or armies. It was simply her. A soft knock at the door startled him. He tensed, expecting guards or advisors, but instead it was a servant bowing low. "Your presence is requested in the strategy room. The council wishes to discuss tomorrow's ceremonies." Ethan's jaw tightened. Ceremonies, they were never simple. Every movement, every word, every glance was designed to impress, to manipulate, to control. He had been trained for politics, yes, but not for the intricate dance of alien nobility. He nodded curtly and followed the servant. Yet even as he walked, his thoughts returned to Aurelia, the princess who opposed a marriage she had been told to embrace, yet had frozen at the sight of him. That moment played over in his mind like a silent drumbeat, persistent and demanding attention. Meanwhile, Aurelia returned inside, meeting the eyes of the council. Her voice was steady, rehearsed even, as she began discussing troop movements and trade negotiations, yet her mind kept drifting. What did it mean the way she had felt something dangerous, when she looked at him? Hours passed like this. Words of strategy, negotiations, and diplomacy flowed, yet beneath it all, a quiet tension grew between what was expected of her and what she felt. Every glance, every word from the council reminded her of the human waiting somewhere in the palace, patient, silent, untouched by protocol or fear. That evening, Aurelia found herself wandering the halls alone. The palace was quiet now, the golden light fading into soft shades of violet. She paused near the windows, watching the city below, thinking of the human who had entered her life like a shadow she could not ignore. Her reflection in the glass was that of a princess, armored, regal, untouchable. Yet she felt fractured. The calm composure she had carried all her life seemed thin, fragile, as if a single word or glance could tear it apart. Behind her, a door creaked softly. She spun, expecting a servant, but it was empty. Then she realized it did not matter. The halls were silent, but her thoughts were not. She whispered to herself, more question than statement, "Why does he make me feel unbound?" Miles away in the quiet of his room, Ethan closed his eyes. He had faced battles, betrayals, and impossible decisions, but never had he felt this weight. Not of duty, not of expectation, but of a pull towards someone whose life was as bound as her crown, yet somehow still free in her defiance. The first fracture had formed, between duty and desire, between crown and heart, between what was expected and what was possible. And in that fracture, both Aurelia and Ethan felt the tremors of a future neither could ignore. Somewhere deep in the palace, unseen and unspoken, a single question began to echo. What happens when two worlds collide, not with weapons but with hearts? And neither was ready for the answer. Night had fallen over the palace, turning its golden spires into shadows edged with silver. Aurelia moved quietly through the corridors, her armor clinking softly with each step. The day's ceremonies and council meetings had ended, but her mind refused rest. She could still see him, Ethan, standing tall, unafraid, a human who had somehow unsettled a princess trained to command armies and empires. She reached the balcony again, the cool night air brushing against her face. Stars glimmered above, distant and indifferent, yet they reminded her that the universe was vast. And maybe, just maybe, her place in it was hers to choose. Her reflection in the glass was a crownless princess, and she realized she was tired of hiding behind golden armor, tired of moving through life as if each step was dictated by someone else's hand. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "You shouldn't be here alone." Aurelia spun, heart racing, and there he was, Ethan. Somehow he had found his way to the balcony without the guards noticing, or perhaps they had chosen not to see. He stood casually, yet the quiet determination in his eyes made her pulse quicken. "You shouldn't," she replied, trying to mask the relief that surged through her. "This isn't safe." "Neither was the hall today," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. "But we were there anyway." His gaze softened. "You froze, Aurelia, not out of fear, but something else." Her throat tightened. She looked away, staring at the distant city lights. "I don't know what I felt," she admitted. "I've never felt anything like it." He took a step closer. "You felt yourself, not the crown, not the duty, not the expectations, just you." The words hit her like a quiet storm. Aurelia wanted to look at him, to study his face, to understand how a human could speak so directly to what she kept hidden from everyone else. But fear lingered. The Council, Seraphine, the Empire itself, they all demanded control. She was supposed to be untouchable. "And if I let myself feel it?" she asked, voice barely audible. Ethan's lips curved faintly. "Then you choose, not for them, not for the crown, for you." Her heart raced, caught between reason and impulse. She had always believed that a princess could never choose freely, that every decision would be weighed against centuries of expectation. But Ethan, he made choice feel possible, even urgent. "Do you know what's dangerous?" she said finally, turning to face him. "The moment I consider that, I might start defying everything I've been taught." "I think," he replied softly, "that's exactly the point." Aurelia's fingers trembled as she clenched her gauntlets. For the first time in her life, she realized that duty and desire could collide not in violence, but in moments like this, quiet, intimate, yet powerful enough to shake entire worlds. They stood there side by side, the night stretching around them. No words were needed for a while. The palace seemed to breathe with them, aware of the fragile tension, the fragile possibility between them. Finally, Aurelia spoke again. "You are human. So many of my people see you as weak, as dangerous, but—" her voice faltered. "But you've never tried to impress anyone. You just exist, and it's enough." Ethan's smile was gentle, patient. Maybe that's all anyone ever needs. For a long moment, they simply existed together in silence. Outside, the wind whispered across the palace towers. Inside, something deeper stirred. The first true acknowledgement of a bond neither title, tradition, nor fear could erase. But the palace was never quiet for long. In the shadows, Seraphine's eyes had been watching through a hidden balcony, her mind racing. The council, the empire, the laws, they would not allow this to continue unchecked. And yet, for the first time, Aurelia understood something terrifying and exhilarating at once. The human at her side was not just a challenge. He was a choice. And for the first time, she realized she could make a choice that belonged entirely to her. The night stretched endlessly, filled with questions neither dared speak aloud. What would it take for a princess to defy her empire? What would it take for a human to risk everything for someone he barely knew? And most importantly, could they survive the storm that was coming? Somewhere in the distance, the city slept unaware that a quiet rebellion had already begun. Morning came with a hesitant light, silver spilling across the marble floors. Aurelia awoke not to alarm bells or the council's summons, but to a quiet emptiness that felt heavier than any command she had ever carried. The night's encounter with Ethan lingered in her mind, like a secret she couldn't share and didn't entirely want to. She donned her golden armor again, adjusting it with mechanical precision, yet every movement felt different. Her hands were lighter, her shoulders carried something unspoken, a newfound awareness that the crown she bore was no longer the only thing defining her. The council convened for the day's deliberations, and Aurelia walked in with her usual composure. Yet beneath the armor, a silent pulse of defiance beat against centuries of expectation. Seraphine's gaze followed her, sharp, calculating, full of suspicion. "You are quiet today," Seraphine said, reflecting on last night. Aurelia met her eyes evenly. "I am considering the future," she replied, careful, "not just what is expected, but what is possible." Whispers ran through the chamber. Nobles exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that something had shifted in the princess. The weight of centuries of protocol pressed on her, yet she felt a strange lightness, a tiny spark of freedom. Later, in a quiet corridor far from prying eyes, Aurelia found Ethan waiting. No guards, no advisors, just him. His presence was calm, familiar, yet charged with something neither dared to name aloud. "You should not be here," she said, though her tone carried less authority than before. "I needed to see you," he replied simply, "to make sure you're safe in your own world." Aurelia hesitated, safe or confined. Ethan's lips curved faintly. Sometimes they feel the same. She glanced at him, really looked at him, noticing the subtle strength in his posture, the steady kindness in his eyes. "Do you know what it feels like," she whispered, "to be told your life is not yours?" "I can imagine," he said, "but imagining is not enough. You need to see it to feel it, and maybe to choose otherwise." Her breath caught. Those words, so simple, so human, struck her with quiet force. She realized she was no longer thinking of the marriage as a duty. She was thinking of it as a decision, one that might finally be hers. "I cannot act without consequences," she admitted, voice trembling. "The council, the empire, everything I am." "Everything you are," he interrupted softly, "does not belong to them entirely. It belongs to you too." For a long moment, silence held them. It was a silence that spoke more than any speech or decree could. Then Aurelia extended her hand, not toward a crown, but toward him. A gesture of trust, of defiance, of something unspoken yet profoundly understood. Ethan took her hand gently. The touch was electric, quiet but undeniable, as if the universe had narrowed to the simple connection between two beings who had, until this moment, been defined by duty rather than choice. "We make a pact," she said quietly. "Not with the Empire, not with the Council, but with ourselves." He nodded, a pact of truth, of choice, of courage. Aurelia felt her heart surge with a strange, dangerous hope. For the first time, she imagined a future that belonged to her entirely, where she could choose not just whom she would marry, but who she would become. Outside the corridor, shadows moved. Seraphine's ears had caught fragments of conversation she should not have overheard. The High Regent's mind raced. Alliances, threats, consequences. A quiet human and a defiant princess, together, were already more dangerous than armies, more unpredictable than treaties. Yet Aurelia and Ethan did not notice. They stood there, hands clasped, a silent understanding weaving between them. For the first time, the weight of expectation felt not like chains, but like wings. And in that fleeting moment, Aurelia dared to ask a question she had never allowed herself to speak aloud. What if the choice is not who I marry, but who I am? The palace outside remained unaware, bustling with routine and politics, yet within a quiet corridor, two hearts had silently pledged rebellion. Not through war, not through defiance, but through connection, trust, and the courage to feel something entirely their own. Somewhere between duty and desire, between crown and choice, a bond had begun that neither the Empire nor the stars could ignore. And in that bond lay the first true spark of hope, dangerous, fragile, and utterly human. The day of the ceremonial signing arrived, golden light flooding the grand hall, highlighting every intricate detail of the palace Aurelia had once walked like a shadow of duty. Nobles from every corner of Lyris filled the room, their eyes sharp with expectation, their whispers a tide of judgment and fear. Today, the marriage would be formalized, and the fate of two worlds would hinge on appearances alone. Aurelia stepped forward, her armor gleaming, her crown in place. She looked every inch the princess her people expected, yet inside, she felt entirely unbound. The morning had been long, every step had carried the weight of centuries of expectation, yet her mind lingered on the quiet pact made with Ethan. That hand clasp, that unspoken understanding, it had changed everything. Ethan stood at the center, hands behind his back, eyes calm but alert. He had trained for diplomacy, prepared for politics, yet nothing had prepared him for the quiet revolution that had begun with a gaze. Their eyes met across the hall, and in that single moment, words were unnecessary. They knew what each other was thinking. Duty could wait. Choice could not. The High Council began their speech, voices echoing through the hall, praising alliances and peace, reminding all present of the cost of war and the virtue of obedience. Oralia listened, outwardly serene, yet inwardly she felt the familiar tremor, the heartbeat of rebellion not against her people, but against a life that had never allowed her to breathe. Seraphine's glare was sharp, directed at her with the precision of a blade. She leaned toward one of the elders. She cannot, she must not. But Oralia's mind was elsewhere. She thought of Ethan, of the quiet strength in his gaze, of the courage it had taken for him to step into her world and still remain himself. The council expected compliance. They expected a princess who bowed, who silenced curiosity, who allowed duty to override heart. But Oralia was no longer certain that compliance could define her. When the moment came for the vows, Oralia's steps carried her forward not just as a princess, but as a woman choosing her path. She faced Ethan, the hall holding its collective breath. The officiant began the formal words, but Oralia's heart beat too loudly to follow them exactly. Then she spoke, voice ringing clear and unwavering. "I stand here today," she said, eyes locking with Ethan. Not merely as the heir of Lyris, not merely as a symbol of duty, but as someone who chooses to act with courage, truth, and heart. A murmur ran through the crowd. The council stiffened. Seraphine's hand twitched toward her staff, but Oralia ignored it. "I do not oppose peace," she continued, "but I will not marry blindly for a crown or for appearances alone. I choose to see the human before me, to understand him, and to decide what that choice means, for me and perhaps for both our worlds." The hall went silent. No one expected defiance framed in such honesty. Ethan stepped forward, taking her hand without ceremony, without fear, only certainty. "And I," he said softly, "stand here not as an envoy, not as a negotiator, but as a man who sees her for who she is. And I choose to walk beside her not because of obligation, but because she makes me believe in something worth protecting." The golden sunlight fell on them both, highlighting the contrast of human and princess, blue eyes meeting blue eyes, gold armor beside simple uniform. The silence of the hall was so thick it could have been cut with a blade. Then came the first ripple of applause, quiet, hesitant, but growing. Some nobles murmured in shock, others in awe. Seraphine's lips pressed into a thin line, but even she could not ignore the strength of choice. Oralia had shown that courage could belong not just to warriors on battlefields, but to hearts willing to defy expectation. Oralia squeezed Ethan's hand, feeling the warmth, the trust, and the promise of something new. "This is our choice," she whispered. "And we make it together," he replied. The hall slowly erupted into acknowledgement, not all acceptance but respect, not all approval but understanding. The first step toward a future unbound by fear had been taken. Outside the palace, the sun glimmered across Lyris, the city alive, the air electric with possibility. Two worlds had collided not in war, but in courage, trust, and the fragile, unbreakable spark of choice. Oralia looked at Ethan, and for the first time in her life she knew the truth of her own heart. The crown on her head was heavy, yes, but the choice in her hand, the life she could now shape, was heavier still. And for the first time she felt entirely, unshakably free. The story of two worlds, and of a princess who dared to choose, had only just begun.